It was a regular Thursday morning at Elite Tech Solutions, with the smooth hum of computers and the rustle of paper providing a soothing background soundtrack. Employees walked with purpose, absorbed in their projects, but today was different for Miles Thompson. The air was thick with excitement as he prepared to deliver a project. He had poured his heart and soul into a groundbreaking software that he believed could not only expedite operations but also set a new standard in the tech sector. As he stood outside the glass-walled conference room, he could feel his colleagues' expectations bear down on him. Dressed in a neat blue blazer, he fixed his tie and took a deep breath, remembering how many hours he had spent perfecting this pitch. He anticipated the project's potential impact, better efficiency, lower costs, and the opportunity for the company to lead in a competitive field. "Are you ready, Miles?" Lisa, the project's manager, smiled reassuringly as she inquired. She had always trusted in his ability, and her confidence provided the impetus he needed. Nodding, he entered the room, carrying a presentation that he thought would impress the executives sat around the table. But when he began to talk, describing the complexities of his revolutionary program, he couldn't shake the suspicion that something was wrong. Mr. Henderson, the CEO, sat at the head of the table, his outsized personality dominating the room. With a sharp suit and an even sharper tongue, he was known for his rapid decisions and disturbing sense of superiority. Miles sensed a shift in the mood as he presented his concept. Mr. Henderson sat back in his chair, a smirk flickering across his lips. "That's an interesting idea, Miles," he remarked, his tone condescending. "But tell me, how do you plan to sell this to clients when it's clearly aimed at, well, you know what I mean?" The words hung in the air like a dense fog, making Miles' heart sink. It was a targeted shot at his race, a subtle reminder that in today's corporate world, the color of his skin could eclipse his ideas. A deep flush rose up his neck, and he battled to keep his cool, conscious that his colleagues were watching attentively, their looks a mix of surprise and unease. "Actually, I believe this software can benefit a diverse range of clients," Miles said, attempting to regain control of the debate. He could feel sweat building at his temples, and his hands trembled slightly as he turned through the slides for his presentation. "Our data shows a growing demand in various demographics, and this project aims to address those needs," but Mr. Henderson would not be deterred. "Right, but let's be honest, clients want someone who looks the part and is relatable. You know how it goes, Miles." The laughing of a couple of the executives around the table shattered his resolve. They had turned this opportunity into a personal attack, a display of superiority that left Miles stunned. As he stood there, feeling like a cornered animal, the voice of a coworker broke through the tension. "But isn't it just what we need? A fresh perspective?" It was Jenna, the only other black employee in the room, and her eyes were filled with resolve. Miles felt a surge of thankfulness. She was brave enough to confront the CEO, but he was also concerned about her safety in this setting. "Fresh perspectives are all well and good," Mr. Henderson argued, waving his hand dismissively. "But we have to ensure our brand maintains its image." His eyes bore into Miles, as if he was doubting his own worth. "Besides, you know how our clients are. Comfort is key, and that's not something we can compromise on." Miles gritted his jaw, attempting to remain professional. He was resolved not to succumb to the humiliation that threatened to engulf him. After what seemed like an age, the conference ended, and Miles walked out of the room, his head held high but his spirit devastated. His coworkers' laughing rang in his mind, and he couldn't help but wonder if they felt the same uneasiness he did, or if they were simply complicit in the situation. Miles leaned against the cool glass wall, trying to figure out what had just happened. He had devoted his time and effort to this endeavor, only to see it reduced to a joke. He looked at his phone, where notifications flashed constantly. Among them was a message from Lisa wondering if he was fine. Her care was a small solace in the middle of his anguish. "Yeah, I'm fine," he said, but the words seemed empty. Inside, he was far from fine. The weight of systematic racism hung over him like a heavy cloud, and he knew he could not let it continue unanswered. But how? Would they trust him if he spoke up? Would they dismiss it as Miles being oversensitive? As he returned to his workstation, he found Jenna standing alone and staring out the window. He approached her carefully, unsure what to say. "Hey," he said, just above a whisper. "Thanks for speaking up there. It means a lot." Jenna turned to him, her face determined. "We can't let this continue, Miles. It's not just about today, it's about transforming the culture here. We have to fight back." "Would you fight back?" he said, doubt creeping into his head. "What can we do? It feels like we're just two people up against a giant." Jenna moved closer, her eyes brimming with fire. "We document everything, every comment and occurrence. We seek support from others. We cannot allow him to make us feel tiny. Our voices matter." Her words lit a fire within him. Perhaps he did not need to fight this battle alone. Perhaps they might cast a light on the gloom that appeared to surround their job. But as he returned to the conference room, he realized that this was only the beginning. Miles was prepared to face the trials that were ahead. What will happen next? Will they muster the fortitude to tackle the toxic culture that had taken hold at Elite Tech Solutions? The question persisted, filled with both fear and determination, as Miles and Jenna began to plan their next steps in a society that had long misjudged them. With a renewed determination fueling a fire within him, Miles knew he couldn't let Mr. Henderson's remarks stand. Over the next 3 days, he and Jenna met privately during lunch breaks to discuss ways to chronicle the toxic environment they had seen. They knew they weren't the only ones affected by the CEO's discriminatory words. The office was filled with unspoken uneasiness. Miles scrupulously documented every instance of bigotry and disrespect he saw, whether it was comments about his job, barbs about his race, or even the way Mr. Henderson interrupted him in meetings. Jenna did the same thing, sharing her own and a few close coworkers' stories. They worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and notes, experiencing an exhilarating mix of terror and empowerment with each new addition to their increasing collection. As the days passed, the stress in the office became palpable. Employees spoke behind closed doors, exchanging anxious glances as Mr. Henderson entered the room. His hubris appeared to grow. He strutted about the hallways like a peacock in a room full of doves, seemingly unconscious of the ripples of displeasure that followed him. Then came the quarterly company meeting, when Mr. Henderson would deliver the performance review to the entire team. This was it, the moment Miles had been waiting for. With Jenna's encouragement, he felt prepared to face the CEO publicly, intending to shed light on the unfairness that had afflicted their workplace. As employees entered the meeting room, the air was electric with anticipation. Miles sat among his coworkers, feeling the weight of their collective experiences bear down on him. The customary exhilaration that comes with the quarterly meeting was missing. Instead, there was a palpable worry in the room. When Mr. Henderson arrived, he was met with a combination of cheers and awkward quiet. He took his spot in the front, exuding confidence. "Welcome, everyone," he bellowed, his voice booming off the walls. "Today, I am thrilled to discuss our company's development and success. We've accomplished incredible things this quarter." Miles exchanged looks with Jenna, who offered him a supportive nod. Here was their chance. As Mr. Henderson proceeded to brag about the company's profitability, Miles' heart raced. He couldn't stand by while the CEO projected a narrative of prosperity that overlooked the real challenges. "Excuse me, Mr. Henderson," Miles said, his voice strong and authoritative. "While I appreciate your enthusiasm about our financial achievements, I believe we should also address some concerns regarding our company culture." The room went silent, eyes wide with horror. Mr. Henderson's smile faded for a brief moment, and Miles felt a rush of adrenaline. "What are your concerns, Miles?" the CEO inquired, pretending interest but with an underlying sharpness to his tone. "Recently, there have been comments made that undermine the contributions of employees, particularly those from diverse backgrounds," Miles said, his voice rising. "I think it's essential for us to foster an environment where everyone feels respected and valued, regardless of their race." Mr. Henderson's mood changed. He leaned forward and narrowed his eyes. I believe you are overreacting, Miles. We are doing quite great. People must toughen up if they want to succeed in business. The tension in the room crackled like static electricity. Miles could feel the increasing pressure from his colleagues, with some nodding in agreement and others turning away uneasily. Overreacting? Miles repeated incredulously. Mr. Henderson, with all due respect, your statements have impacted not only myself but many others. We must hold ourselves accountable if we are to move forward as a corporation. Miles felt a ray of hope as he heard a murmur of agreement among the audience. But Mr. Henderson was not going to back down. I am the CEO, Miles. I know what is best for the company. You are not in a position to dictate how I conduct things. Jenna stood beside him, her voice firm and unwavering. But we are in a position to request change. Silence simply permits this behavior to continue. We need to collaborate, not just for profit, but also for a better workplace. The atmosphere was tense, with a palpable mix of terror and unity. Mr. Henderson's cheeks flushed, and Miles noticed a break in his armor. I won't tolerate insubordination, he yelled. Miles's heart raced when he caught Jenna's gaze. They were fighting a Goliath, and while fear filled his veins, adrenaline reminded him that they weren't alone. But as Mr. Henderson's rage grew, Miles couldn't avoid the notion that the struggle had only just begun. What would the consequences be for standing up? Will they be heard, or will they merely exacerbate the splits inside the company? As he exited the meeting room, doubt hung over him, but a glimmer of determination lit up his spirit. They would battle for justice together, whatever the cost. Following the meeting, the tension in the office grew like a dense fog. Miles could feel his coworkers' eyes on him as he walked back to his desk, a mixture of adoration and dread in their expressions. Whispers filled the air, and he caught bits of conversations concerning his altercation with Mr. Henderson. Some commended his courage, while others were concerned for their own employment. The mood became increasingly charged over the next few days. Mr. Henderson's rage was apparent, and Miles found himself on the receiving end of it more than once. The CEO would storm past his workstation, delivering icy glares that penetrated him like ice. During team meetings, Miles sensed Mr. Henderson's disdain as the CEO made subtle barbs at his performance, aiming to weaken his confidence. Look at Miles, so eager to rock the boat, he'd say, smirking as he addressed the rest of the squad. We all know that in business, the squeaky wheel gets replaced. Every insult hung heavily in the air, making it difficult for Miles to breathe. He felt isolated and vulnerable, but he refused to allow Mr. Henderson's words break his determination. Jenna remained his anchor, pushing him to stay focused on their goal, to create a healthy work atmosphere and confront the company's toxic culture. Mr. Henderson became increasingly hostile as the weeks passed. He began excluding Miles from critical meetings and withholding project-related information. Miles noted that his workload grew, although Jenna and her colleagues were handled with more care and consideration. It was as if Mr. Henderson was purposefully making him feel small. Just ignore him, Jenna urged during one of their lunch breaks. You are doing the right thing. We cannot let him silence us. However, it became more difficult to ignore the animosity. Miles felt like he was walking on eggshells, constantly aware of Mr. Henderson's critical eye. The strain became so intense that he couldn't sleep at night, haunted by thoughts of what would happen if he lost his job or if things escalated further. Then came the last straw. During an all-staff meeting to discuss company goals for the following quarter, Mr. Henderson made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the room. We're restructuring a few departments, he announced with a smug smirk on his face. Unfortunately, there will be some layoffs to streamline our operations. The air became dense with tension as staff exchanged anxious glances. Miles' heart raced as he felt the weight of dread settle into his stomach. He could feel the storm gathering and knew it was aimed at him. Mr. Henderson went on, "And to those who believe they can undermine my authority or disrupt the harmony of our workplace, let this be a warning. I will not hesitate to make cuts if required." Miles felt a chill run down his spine. It seemed as if Mr. Henderson had laid down the gauntlet, daring anyone to speak up against him. Fear spread throughout the room, and Miles recognized that the CEO was intent to maintain control by suppressing any criticism and silencing anybody who tried to confront him. As Miles looked around at his coworkers, he felt a mix of rage and determination. He had come too far to retreat now. However, as he prepared to confront this growing menace, he couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes had never been higher. Will he and Jenna find a way to disclose the truth? Or will Mr. Henderson silence them for good? The ensuing days were characterized by a greater sense of urgency. Miles and Jenna felt they needed to act immediately before Mr. Henderson's warnings became true. The tension in the office increased with each passing instant, and Miles felt the weight of anxiety bear down on him. He could see the fear on his co-workers' faces, each aware of the impending layoffs, but too terrified to speak up. Miles and Jenna arranged to meet after work at a nearby cafe, a quiet refuge where they could discuss their next steps away from their CEO's watchful gaze. As they sipped their coffees, they began to plan. "We need to gather more evidence," Jenna said, her voice low but determined. "We cannot let him get away with this. If we can demonstrate how toxic this environment is, we might be able to expose him." With a shared sense of purpose, they began reaching out to colleagues, asking if they would be ready to share their experiences and join forces against Mr. Henderson. They gradually collected a group of employees who shared their values and were eager to join the battle for justice. It was empowering to know they weren't alone, but the threat of retaliation loomed big. As they collected testimonials, a watershed moment occurred. Miles was reviewing his notes at home one evening after work when he received an unexpected email from Jenna. "You won't believe what I found," she wrote eagerly. The email included a recording and audio file from a prior meeting that had been unintentionally left on. The contents revealed Mr. Henderson making disparaging remarks about employees' ability based on their color, his voice filled with contempt. Miles got a rush of adrenaline while listening to the audio. This was the evidence they required. It wasn't simply Miles and Jenna's accusations against Mr. Henderson. They now had his own comments to hold him accountable. "This changes everything," Miles told himself, his heart beating with hope and expectation. The next day, Miles and Jenna met with their colleagues, the audio recording securely kept on his laptop. "We have something big," Miles said, revealing the recording. Gasps flooded the room as they listened carefully, their eyes bright with surprise. It was a frightening confirmation of their suspicions, proving that the toxic society was more than a fiction of their imagination, but a reality they had lived with for far too long. Fueled by a fresh sense of purpose, they decided it was time to confront Mr. Henderson and submit their findings. They set up a meeting with the board of directors, ready to reveal the truth behind the CEO's facade. Miles felt both anxious and exhilarated as they prepared for the encounter. Would the board listen? Will they take action? The day of the meeting arrived, and the atmosphere was charged with tension. Miles gazed around the conference room and saw his co-workers' determination, fear, and resoluteness. Mr. Henderson came with a confident smile, ignorant of the turmoil developing around him. "Welcome, everyone," he said, his tone smooth and powerful. But Miles felt the weight of the tape in his pocket, like a concealed weapon waiting to be unleashed. As he described their experiences, he noticed Mr. Henderson's disbelief grow. Then it was time. Miles took out his laptop, accessed the audio file, and played the tape. The room grew silent, the tension evident as Mr. Henderson's comments bounced off the walls. "How could you?" he exploded, his mask slipping as astonishment and wrath seized hold. Miles and Jenna exchanged eyes, with a mix of fear and triumph in the air. For the first time, they had cornered Mr. Henderson. They could feel power moving, but would justice eventually prevail? The tension in the conference room increased as the audio recording continued. Mr. Henderson's face became crimson with wrath, and his previous confidence crumbled. "You don't know what you're doing," he roared, his voice booming against the walls. Miles, however, remained steady, buoyed by the support of his colleagues. The board members were astonished, exchanging glances as the gravity of the situation became clear. Mrs. Patel, a board member, leaned forward with a serious expression. Mr. Henderson, these are significant claims. We cannot ignore this. Miles took a deep breath and walked forward after the playback was ended. We're here to create a fair workplace free of racism and hostility. This isn't just about me, it's about everyone who has been impacted by your actions. His voice, once trembling with fear, was now resonant with conviction. The board listened closely as employees related their experiences, each one establishing a strong case against Mr. Henderson. With each witness, it became evident that the toxic climate he had created could not be ignored. In the days that followed, the board took prompt action. They launched an internal investigation and discovered overwhelming proof of Mr. Henderson's misbehavior. Within a week, he was summoned to a meeting and, following the board's conclusions, fired. Miles and his colleagues felt a sense of relief as the news broke. They had stood together, faced the injustice, and succeeded. In his absence, the board hired a new CEO who was committed to creating a courteous and inclusive workplace. The next day, as Miles walked through the workplace, he felt a sense of togetherness with his coworkers, as if they had all made a difference. They celebrated together, no longer afraid of vengeance but invigorated by their combined strength. In the end, Miles learned that while justice is not always simple to achieve, speaking up for what is right can result in tremendous change. The conclusion of the narrative is that when we work together to combat injustice, we can create a world where fairness and respect reign supreme. True power resides in the courage and determination to speak up, for doing so paves the way for a better future for all.